In this video, you'll hear from a scheduling industry veteran, Tim Mather. Tim and I sit down to discuss how scheduling is changing and what the impact of AI will be to the industry.
Hey Tim, thanks for joining. I thought we'd start with just, you've been in the industry for a while and have done a lot of thought leadership. Would you mind just do a really brief introduction of what you've done in your career that we can start with?
Sure, yeah. Thanks for having me. Well, out of college, I went to work for IBM and then started my own company where we developed software mostly for the manufacturing industry. And then I joined a company called PMA. I took my company and merged it in with PMA. So we developed software for scheduling industry in construction and planning and risk management, and kind of developed that over the years. And that became a successful part of that business. And I left there last year.
Great. Well, yeah, it won't be a surprise then that a lot of my questions will be around scheduling. And so I guess when we look at the industry, you've been in the industry for some time. And when you look at how a typical major construction project is being controlled and scheduled in 2026, what would you say is generally better than 10 years ago? And what do you think might be a bit embarrassingly the same?
Well, sadly, it's a pretty short list of what's better, in my opinion. I would say that the integration of some of the web-based tools has been helpful. I mean, if you think about 10 years ago, in the construction industry and globally, especially large projects, was almost all Oracle P6. And a lot of that the majority of it was desktop-based, right? Even if it was multiple desktops into a single unified platform within the organization, it wasn't web-based. And the opportunity to integrate other tools and data sources wasn't there. So I would say that's probably the biggest improvement over the last decade that I've seen. In terms of things that are about the same, the disconnect between the field and the made-up model that is the critical path schedule in P6. I think if you have, a 5-year program with 30,000 activities in it, you're making it up. Like, you don't know that 3 years from now, this I-beam is going to get bolted to that piece of concrete. It's not true. You don't know that. So I think that a way of integrating more closely the planning and execution side with real-time updates would be a great thing to see improved. And I haven't seen much improvement in that. And then I think too that the kind of the bent of a lot of the CPM programs that I've seen has to do with litigations and claims, that the ability to defend your position on a critical path network if there are claims after the project. And that seems like a pretty negative way to spend your energy.
Can I just dig into a few of those? So you mentioned the first one being, more of a move to these web-based platforms. And you sort of mentioned, just to clarify there, so is that because there's now more competition in what platforms are available, or it's more easy to integrate them with other data sources, or why is that specifically, do you think, an improvement?
So I think that the ability to integrate is a big one, that the ability to connect across apps on the web is way better. I was a CTO for quite a while, and from a security standpoint, it's way better to not have things on-prem. So I think that the IoT almost function, the way to interconnect and share data and have real-time updates and triggers and things like that is way better on the web than...
Yeah. And I guess in this case, on-prem would mean that you have some software package that only really runs on your device or your company's network and can't speak to the outside world very easily.
Right. Which a decade ago was kind of the standard for PC.
Yeah, definitely. The real-time updates is also interesting. As you say, I mean, who knows? You build this really complicated, detailed schedule, and is it just in your experience that people aren't revisiting it and manually checking, forecasting, or is it that, what's more around this real-time issue?
Yeah, I'd say that I see the field work and the schedule as running on two separate parallel paths. Even if you were to do an update bi-weekly, that 30,000 activity schedule is not actually driving work on the site. They're going to have their own little 2-week look-ahead schedule, right? So then you're going to take that look-ahead schedule, and maybe every 2 weeks, every month, you're going to come together and update your big 30,000 activity schedule. And then you're going to end up with some things out of sequence, some things that got started that shouldn't have been started, some things that weren't started that were supposed to be started. And then all these adjustments happen. And it just seems like a kabuki theater to me. Like you're trying to align reality when really you should have one consistent platform that is thought out and is accessible to everyone and actually drives the work.
Yeah. Cool. That makes a lot of sense. So moving into some of the, I guess the work you've published and some of the thought leadership that I mentioned before, you had this the core traits of a reliable schedule protocol, and you co-authored, and for my read, it's sort of talking about industry getting good at building schedules but not reviewing them, which is kind of what we're talking about here. What obviously we just talked about that gap persisting, but what does that really cost the owner? You talked about disputes and complications on that side, but what is how would you describe that cost in more detail?
Geez, there's so much to it. Depending on how you run your project, the contractor is going to have their critical path schedule. If you have an owner's rep, they may maintain their own critical path schedule almost as a defensive move, right? And so you've got whatever energy and funds and distraction it takes to maintain two extensive, detailed, logically tied schedules and update them over the life of the project. That's an out-of-pocket cost. The contractor is going to build that cost into their price, and the owner's rep or the internal organization is going to have to pay to have their own schedule maintained. But I think more importantly, the cost and execution that and the reliable traits, we talk about having a schedule that's aligned and includes being risked and includes having the right durations given the length of the project and not having too much float or too little float built into the schedule. All those things add to potentially a lack of execution on the project. And that's where the real expense comes. If you fail to execute properly on your project will be delayed. And presumably you're building this because you want it. Then, if it's a pharmaceutical plant or a semiconductor plant, you're losing, or a casino, you're losing money every single day that it's not operating. And in any case, the general conditions is going to cost you money every day that it extends, or liquidated damages, depending on how the contract's set up. So I think delay through lack of execution is probably the biggest reason to do a good job in forward planning and then translating that planning into an actionable schedule where the goal isn't more detail, the goal is better execution.
Yes. Yeah. The goal should be getting the project done, not having a really pretty document or something that, looks really complicated.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
And so, you've talked a bit there about, in particular, critical path method, CPM being sort of past its prime and having these issues. Why do you think it's still the default on virtually every major project?
I would say inertia, contractual inertia and professional inertia. Contractually, many of the contracts require a P6 schedule. And from a professional standpoint, make a P6 schedule so complicated, and you have to be an expert scheduler and an expert at P6 to actually navigate it, which then makes that person, special. And so there's a lot of those people out there. And then after the fact, the whole forensic scheduling expert witness industry, which is an industry, a multi-billion-dollar industry, they're invested in really understanding and knowing how to fight over a P6 schedule.
Right. So yeah, it's been so long that everything is baked in around that concept. You've spent a good amount of time then looking at different ways to do that, and your software was really based around GPM, I guess, as an alternative, right? And so, what do you think would have to change for an owner to specify? Well, do you think GPM is still a better way to approach it? Are there other methods that are emergent?
I think that GPM was an innovation that had applicability in the front-end planning, but because of the graphical nature of GPM, it didn't scale that well for large schedules. So in terms of interactive planning session at the beginning to get alignment and to build the level 0, level 1 schedule, that was helpful, but it wouldn't scale to, a turnaround of a chemical plant, for instance, that's just too many wheels spinning at the same time to be captured. I think probably the advent of AI within the world of scheduling is probably one of the biggest opportunities we have, because the ability to build a data lake off a whole project and then natural language query that project for answers is going to level the playing field for all the professionals who have questions, whether it's the CFO or the project sponsor or the contractor, wherever. I mean, how many activities have less than 2 days of float right now? And boom, you don't need to know P6 if you got that thing shared out. So.
Well, that's a good segue, actually. Before we were recording, I mentioned that I'm now based in San Francisco and really sort of getting deep into the AI world, this transformation that's happening here. And so, talking a bit more about AI directly, and you mentioned this ability to use natural language to query the schedule and get these answers, and for I guess democratizing that or having that more easily accessible by everyone on the project. But what else? What other use cases do you think are really interesting at this point in time for applying the advances in AI to the job?
Right. I think one of the biggest applications is taking it above the project level to the portfolio level. You can imagine that if you're a project controls leader at a pharmaceutical company, you've got 30, 40 projects going on around the world. Wouldn't it be wonderful to be able to just have the whole vision available to you to query against, from finance through scheduling, through updates, through safety, everything available in one easy to query database, data lake. I think that's probably a great application. And then I think too, that some of the work so much project management these days is driven by filling out forms, updating spreadsheets, all that repetitive, mindless work, which is required in order to get current status, right? But it's the kind of thing that could be automated through AI. Not only would that bring great efficiency, but also it would emancipate experienced project manager from that kind of low-level work and allow them to apply their time to a higher value function.
Yeah, you sort of talk about one way I've been thinking about this is like a kind of on-demand active use, and then kind of like an always-on. You kind of describe like a self-healing system where as things diverge from reality, the AI is able to update that. And that's something I've been thinking about a lot, those two different modes. And I think at the moment, there's a bias towards just where we are in the maturity, more people doing the former. Let's ask a question and let's build, let's generate a schedule to begin with, whatever it is. It's just kind of a human sitting in front of a computer asking something, which I think has a lot of room to run still in terms of value we can get. But then, as you say, there's this ability to have these systems of always on and realigning everything and making sure the system, the project is healthy without needing to every second day have a look, do a bunch of web forms, update data and all that pain. Would you agree with those two paradigms? Do you think there's another lens to look at this?
I agree with that. I think maybe the separation that we're talking about here is prompt driven versus agentic, and to build a specific agent to watch for schedule progress. Where are we losing float in the schedule? Is something near critical but trending towards critical? You can capture it ahead of time in a 30,000 activity schedule. Nobody's going to notice it till it turns bright red. So can we maybe get ahead of the curve a little bit and have agents that watch for trend analysis? I think that could be very helpful.
And do you think, I think one difficulty with, we're really in the early days of all this AI stuff. That's my read at least, especially in the terms of applying it to real use cases. And so there is this that does mean that at the moment there's this big split between applications of AI that work well and are real, and then novelty demos that you try out and it fails. And I think one difficulty there is the novelty demo that doesn't actually work today, and you feel like you see this thing and it feels like you've been cheated a bit because it didn't actually turn out. Maybe in 3 months it does work because the models have got better or the tooling around it has got better. How do you think about, as a practitioner, adopting these tools and what expectations to have?
Sure. I guess I have a few different thoughts on that. The first is that I think that because we don't have a track record for how quickly it's evolving, it's hard to judge. where it will be, but I know for sure
Mm.
that a year ago, I tried integrating Cursor with Claude Code on my machine, and it was like having a really bad intern. Like, took more energy to get it to do something than it actually produced. And I re-upped it maybe a month ago, and it was so much better. It was amazing. So I think it's hard to judge that in this environment because it's evolving so quickly that it would be difficult for one person to be able to judge it. And then if you stack on top of that the historically conservative and resistant nature of the engineering and construction industry, I think that's going to be a challenge to overcome for us because in my experience over many years, a new idea is not a good idea in construction and engineering. I mean, it must have been 22 years ago, we built a daily reporting Palm app and, it got assigned to a group of people and they wouldn't do it. They fell under the truck wheels or whatever, they wanted their handwritten book. And I think, there's some good reasons for conservatism in engineering. You don't want the bridge to be under-engineered, but I think that's a real thing for us.
I think one thing that we focus on a lot is being able to get reference and audit why the AI has come up with something.
Mhm.
To your point, you need high confidence that what you're getting is actually correct. And that's something in particular in our industry I think is really important. Compared to using AI to write a story, there isn't really a wrong answer there.
Right.
And so that need isn't shared across every industry. But you're definitely right. From my role as a CTO of a software company, since December, that vintage of AI models haven't suddenly become 20x better, but the incremental improvement that they did have suddenly pushed it past a threshold that made it really useful for a lot of things.
Mhm.
And so it's really hard to know. I'm constantly talking about this with my team. Oh, the AI models don't work well for these kind of things. Let's push that to the side. But the new model might come out and suddenly it does work. And
Right.
so it is something that you have to, I think, keep your mind open to as this is developing. But it's tough. It's tough.
It is.
It means you got to spend a lot of time just working on it and playing around with it yourself.
Yeah. I think too, the kind of unsettled nature of the economics of AI that's a little bit of a frustration. How dependent do you want your company to become on an undefined token burn rate kind
Mm.
of setup? I mean,
From a pricing point of view,
mhm. Yeah.
and I guess there's also just the capability dependency, what happens there as you rely on those systems more and more. I mean, yeah,
As they're competing with each other, if you go all in on one and then he kind of drops off, then you've got to retrain everybody and you've invested in all this infrastructure and internal knowledge, and then you got to switch it over.
I guess the techno optimist view would be that the best AI models that exist today are the worst that will ever exist in the history of humanity. So moving forwards at least.
That
So
would be good.
there is something to balance there. Going back to my questions here. Give me one moment. Oh yeah, I wanted to ask you about, again, we've both had quite technical backgrounds. I think you've swam around, into the technical and non-technical world, which is great. But again, for a, practitioner, someone, doing the work on a project, how would you advise them to try and play around and get familiarity with these AI tools?
Well, I guess it would depend partly on what they're practicing in terms of scheduler themselves. As an example, I would say interrogate the data set, the schedule itself using an so that might be, show me out of the last 6 updates, show me if there was one particular work stream that is running behind or whatever questions you wanted to ask. More to learn yourself, more about your schedule, to use the AI to instruct yourself. I think filling out forms, if you have the ability to drive an agent environment, can be very helpful, but also very important to check those forms don't just let the agent run wild. How many cases have we seen in federal court where lawyers have tried to use AI to write a brief and ended up with hallucinated references?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, I think there was one I saw last year where the submission actually had the text, "I am an AI system, do not fully trust this output." That left it in there. They just copy and pasted the whole thing in there and called it a day.
Yep.
Yeah, that's been happening. That's been a bit of an adjustment. We've talked a bit about. I just wanted to come back to this whole concept of, you talked about AI agents and agentic AI. I sort of think of that concept as, instead of just having one prompt to this AI system that comes back with one response, you're able to have the system that can take what you've asked and go off and do many different steps, use different other tools, do web search, call and make requests to your platforms, and come back with a much higher quality answer. That's sort of the agentic side, and I guess this agent side as well is sort of almost something that you can offload work to, and it can go off, do work for you. You can go get a coffee, come back, or maybe do some more important work while you wait. That's a bit of a thing we're seeing a lot of people do. They hand off their work to an AI agent, and then they think, oh, okay, now I can just have a break, have a nap, and come back. Whereas it does open you up to be able to do more work as well. But on those two concepts, we talked about using that to have this self-healing system, and maybe even as a bit of a co-worker, or something you can recruit into your team. Have you seen people talk about that sort of concept and starting to think of these systems as team augmentation capabilities?
Sure. Yeah. I think one example that is pretty striking is kind of a monthly sales report where they get in a bunch of PDF updates from around the country, and they used to read through the PDFs and create a spreadsheet and then make graphs from the spreadsheet. And they create an agent that reads through the PDFs, creates a spreadsheet, and makes the graphs. So in my cursor work, I was creating updates for dashboards. And so the amount of time that I was able to save just having the system manipulate the data set and then update the dashboard was terrific. And I didn't actually go agent on that. I was just testing it out. But you could, if it was a monthly repetitive process, you could create an agent to manage that.
Yeah, definitely. And from a, I guess thinking now a bit about managing risk analysis has historically been, you have a Monte Carlo simulation bolted onto your schedule, slow, expensive, runs once. Do you think the opportunities with AI mean that you can now be running this risk analysis continuously rather than one-off, or how do you see that the risk side changing?
Yeah, I do think there are some opportunities to change our view of risk using AI, because you're right. Fully updated risk analysis is a time-consuming manual labor process. And one of the concepts that we had in the scheduling protocol that we wrote was to have a regularly risk schedule. That risk should actually be a part of your project as it executes, not just at the beginning to get through a stage gate or something. And so obviously the more information, the better. But if that information is very expensive to obtain, then maybe it's not better. So the idea of creating your original risk register and then having AI maybe query to see if any of those risks were emerging and update them and rerun the Monte Carlo, that makes perfect sense to me. And you can suffer, particularly in scheduling, but I think in anything, you can suffer from death by 1,000 cuts, where if you have 1,000 change orders in a project, even if none of them affect the critical path, you know that you've increased the risk of that project ending late, because you can't have that much change and not impact something along the way. And I think AI would do a great job of kind of scheming out, well, what if this path is the one that's affected? Does this currently non-critical path, if all these risks emerge, become critical?
Yeah, there is a big, I think, direction application of AI that people are using around simulation, running very detailed simulations. And yeah, that sounds like a really interesting use case as well. From, I guess, one other thing you talked about is this really great opportunity to replace a lot of the record keeping, the updating, the statusing, the reporting. If we assume at some point all those kind of the drudgery kind of those tasks does get taken over by some AI system, what does the scheduler become? Where does their work go towards? What do they end up spending most of their time on?
Right. I think the real professional schedulers that I've met are craftsmen. They understand what they're trying to accomplish, and they understand how to look at the model. So they're just clicking keys. They really understand projects and the interactions and the way to tie logic. And that's where you can get more value out of their experience and their intuition and all those things that they bring with them through their years of experience.
And so I guess it's more, they have this experience, they're seeing all the data come in and they're able to have a higher, using that experience and I guess that taste they've built up, that's a term a lot of people are using there. They're able to make more accurate predictions of what will happen or what needs to change, report better. Interesting. Do you think there's always this kind of maturity curve of how long it takes for new technology to really permutate all the different use cases within an industry? And often it takes 10 years for that to really happen. And what do you think in this case? Do you think this is a case where this is, with AI coming in, this is like a slow burn that over the next 10 years, this will build up into something that becomes really useful? Or do you think that it could sort of become this thing where, if you look away, you come back, suddenly it's made this leap that, you sort of need to just keep on top of?
I think it's hard to predict. I don't think, I know in my lifetime, there has not been this big an investment this quickly in any given technology. And also as transformative as, for instance, the internet has been to the world, I think AI holds the potential to be more transformational and it's better funded. That being said, our earlier caveats about our industry being conservative, the way that P6 currently controls the scheduling world, those are things we'll have to work around, I think, to get more penetration and adoption. But the use case is very clear to me. If an organization like the Construction Users Roundtable or some of the big contracting organizations were to adopt a platform and a standard, then I think you'll see it drive a lot faster. And so the question there is, they're going to have to see the value in changing.
Yeah, it is interesting that it's a mix of not just, I think there's a stereotype of people who've been doing a job a certain way, not wanting to change that. But it's also that, a lot of these methods and systems are written into contracts and part of standards. And so, if you do want to make a significant change in how the job is done, it's not just bring in new people with new thoughts. It's a bit bigger than that.
Yeah, I'm a big proponent of organizational change management as an approach to managing change. And there's an organization called ProSci that came up with this acronym called ADKAR. So ADKAR stands for, are you aware that you need to change? Do you have a desire to change? Do you have the knowledge, the ability? And then are you being reinforced? And I think that's a good framework to look through how quickly our industry will change. I think a lot of the industry is not even aware that they need to change at this point. And you have to get through each stage gate to actually have a successful change. So until they're aware, it doesn't matter if they have the knowledge or not, or the desire, or any of it, right? So I think that awareness will come from economic pressure. Somebody's going to figure this out and apply it and start undercutting other people, and then they're going to be forced to do it.
I think, one thing on that I've noticed is some organizations are starting to elevate someone into this role of the, AI champion, AI implementations person internally, tasking that person to find all these opportunities. But what I've been seeing from talking with customers is that it's actually really hard to have the creativity to come up with all the different things that you could do with these systems. And so people end up just falling back to, the same 2-3 use cases that everyone else is doing. Do you have any thoughts on how someone, maybe doing that role or wanting to have that outcome of finding more value from AI, how they can, open up that creativity and find some of these not so obvious use cases?
Sure. Well, I think kind of one thing that AI generally as an industry isn't talking too much about is the fear that people have that AI is going to take their job, right? And so in organizational change management speak, that is resistance. People become resistant to change when they think the change is going to have a negative impact on them. So how do you give an organization psychological safety in the process of adopting AI? And also, how do you recruit people who will be champions for AI at different levels of the organization? And one of the ways that we would do that is by finding what we call WIFM, which is what's in it for me. So, if a PM's worst nightmare is updating all these spreadsheets, say, you know what, we're going to help you update all these spreadsheets using AI. And then they'll like AI because we've done something for them versus training AI to take their job from them.
Yeah. I have noticed there's always more, applying software to give a better outcome is one value prop, and then applying software to remove pain and tasks that people find boring is universally more easily, adopted and people willing to do it. So I always think that's a great place to start as well.
Yeah.
But I guess zooming now, kind of wrapping up and thinking about the future. So this is, very airy-fairy, but, let's think we're in 2035. What do you think a project team, a scheduler, what do you think they're doing, and how are they using software, AI, new technologies to manage the project? What's different, do you think?
So I think under the Project Management Institute's PMBOK, their project management book of knowledge, they say, 90% of a project manager's job is to communicate. And so I agree with that. I think that communication and coordination is the highest value and the most important thing that a project manager does. They're the only one with the full view, who's able to arbitrate different stakeholders' interests and that kind of thing. And so if we could use AI to better inform a project manager and their team as to project status, project trends, change orders, whatever, then they can do a better job communicating and executing on the job. Because again, if the job gets out of sync through lack of communication or lack of data update, then you're driving blind. You don't know what you should do next. And then you have a diffusion of energy in the team and you can spend resources you don't need to spend. So yeah, I think more focused ability to communicate accurately, predictively would be a big benefit to projects.
And do you see that as like in the movies, there's this like, glowing red eye kind of AI thing that you're talking to and it's just managing everything and all the humans are kind of hands off and just doing the executive function. Yes, let's do this or not.
Sure. Yeah,
what do you think is the interface in a crazy world like that?
Yeah, I mean, think about it. Progress, as an example. Currently, progress is a human activity. I don't think in 2035 it needs to be. You should be able to progress the project based on sensors, or who knows, by then, 2035, maybe there'll be 100 robots on the site doing the work and reporting the data back real time. Oh, I put this brick on, I put this brick on, or whatever, right? So, from that standpoint, yeah, I mean, it really probably your biggest risk is, robot maintenance, not project execution, because that's going to be very predictable.
No, that's an interesting one in terms of, forecasting, time to achieve something. If you have robots, they can very precisely record how long it took them to do every single micro action and build up. And time everything so it's all consistent.
Yep. And you could run a digital twin in advance too at that point, right? So you could build the project and say, oh, you know what, on the 5th floor the robots are falling over, so let's fix that before we start actually building anything.
Yeah, bring back that that digital twin idea. Look, I think that's most of the questions I had, Tim. Was there anything you think that I haven't asked that is worth answering, or the blind spot there in the questions?
No, I guess it seems like it's industry smart people talking about the industry versus big push for mass tech, right? But I think that your system for reading contracts is really cool, and we didn't talk about that at all. But other than that, yeah.
Yeah, I think our, from the perspective of Mastt, our current approach is we want to remove all these jobs that people need to do that are boring, time intensive, error prone,
Yeah.
and just annoying stuff that people don't like doing. Try to reduce that as much as possible for people. And then on the other side, help give them the tools to, as you say, pull out, extract the actual insights from all this raw data. So that's what we're working on at the moment. We do see these big themes around agents, AI agents, as being a way to accelerate that and augment that even more. So that's something that this year we'll be releasing more about.
Yeah. I think, I really like your approach. So I think just keep heading that way. I mean, I think it's so cool.
Yeah, we do too. We do too. I mean, that's why I'm here in San Francisco to try and, we're an Australian company. You don't want to be, thinking about all these things months after everyone else. At the moment, there's really sort of this race from a software perspective on, who can break through these, discover these use cases fastest and deliver that to customers fastest. So that's really what I'm doing here, and it's been pretty fun so far.
That's awesome.
But thanks so much, Tim. Really appreciate all the time and you bringing all your experience to this conversation. One last thing, is there anything, do you have a bit of a public presence that you want to point people towards? Is there anything you'd want people to read from what you've written or follow you anywhere?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, my wife and I own a project controls, project management company. So I'd say probably they would be the place to feed it.
Great. And what's that called, and how can people find it?
It's a good one. It's sbsnorthwest.com.
Great. We'll leave it there. And thanks again, Tim. And I'll chat to you again soon.
Talk to you soon. Bye.
See ya.
Thanks for watching, guys. If you want to know more about construction and get all the professional tips, tricks, and AI advice from real construction project managers, follow this channel for more insights.